or flight type responses. Oh. And it's not until they get older that they're able to develop executive function, which means the actual development of these parts of the brain. If you think of your forehead, behind your forehead is your frontal lobe, and that's the part of the brain that helps you to dampen down on impulses or make you pause before you do something. If you didn't have executive function, you would be operating on this primitive brain all the time, and you would be you wouldn't think twice before doing something that's not allowed. Hitting someone, stealing something, doing something violent. We all might feel like that at times, but it's our executive function that helps us to override that. So, as it says here, self-regulation is the ability to monitor and control impulses and to remember social expectations of behaviour. So, if we all behaved exactly as we wanted to, society wouldn't really work. We all have to sort of stick to a code of behaviour for society to function properly, and that's what we're trying to support children to do. So they're not hitting each other, they're not pushing each other over. Those impulses, we've all seen it in children, haven't we? That impulse to push someone else over or pull someone else's hair or hit them with something, it's just their impulse. But they don't necessarily have the development in their brain to be able to self-regulate yet, to be able to pause, or for their brain to say, hang on, that's not really what you should be doing. Do you think that's a really good idea? No, it's not. So when you think of it like this, that children's brains literally aren't wired the same as ours, you can begin to understand why they have trouble with this impulsive behavior, or when they have some sort of big emotions, how that might be overwhelming for them because their brain just literally doesn't work in the same way as ours does just yet. And it actually, executive function can take years to develop. And there are theories that some teenagers and even people in their early 20s haven't achieved full executive function. And that sometimes can be attributed to why teenagers indulge in risky behavior, don't they? And some adults too. Perhaps they haven't got executive function yet. But generally speaking, when we're looking at children, we're helping them to develop this develop self-regulation, in their early years, ready for when they go on to school and their behaviour expected to be behaving in a certain way. So let's have a look at our 5 proven ways to support the executive function and self-regulation. These have come from the Early Years Evidence Store, as always, and I think I've put a link at the end. Yes, I'm pretty sure I have. If I haven't, I'll make sure I include it later. I'll whiz through them and then we'll go back and explain them a little bit more. The first one is co-regulation, so working alongside children. Enabling challenge. Encouraging collaborative play or teamwork. Physical activity, and talking about learning and things they've learned in the past. So let's go up to number 1, co-regulation. We've heard the term self-regulation. That's when a child or adult can regulate their own emotions and behavior. We might know the term dysregulation, where a child or an adult can't regulate because they're overwhelmed with this rush of emotions and the impulse to behave in a certain way. Co-regulation is when we as practitioners work alongside children to help them manage these massive big emotions. So in the same way that we might scaffold or support or model any other type of development, we also do the same with emotions. Let's have a very simple example. One child has got a toy, another child wants it, they're going to snatch it from them. That's their impulse, I want it, I'm going to take it. But if we're modeling co-regulation with them, what we're saying is something along the lines of, oh, so and so's playing with that now, but we could say, when you've finished, can I have a turn, please? Something along those lines. I'm sure we've all probably done that. That's co-regulation. It's working alongside the child to model a different way of behaving. It helps them when you're doing this modeling and scaffolding and supporting them to understand this behavior. It helps their brain to literally, so their synapses start working, and it helps them to develop this executive function because you've modeled a different way, so their brain can say, oh, impulsive way is not the way forward, let's try this other way instead. Obviously, we all know what very young children are like. It's not going to work overnight, but it's a gentle process throughout their early years. Everything you look at to do with executive function and self-regulation, without fail, co-regulation is the number one thing you can do to support children's self-regulation. It's just the top thing. You're probably doing it all the time, but it's quite a good way, I think, to remember that what you're actually doing is helping their brain develop. You're not just correcting something or saying, no, you can't have that, it's someone else's turn. You're modeling a way that you could resolve that problem, that they could negotiate with someone else. Can I have a turn when you've finished, please? Would it be all right if I look at your toy? That type of thing. Modeling like that can really, really help children. It's the number one thing you can do to support children in this area. The second one is enabling challenge. We've talked about this quite a lot, haven't we, over the last years? The idea that children need to try, fail, and try again. Because in doing so, you're developing resilience. Again, the brain is learning it's not the end of the world if that thing didn't work straight away, because children become massively frustrated and overwhelmed with frustration. But if they're starting to develop that resilience, then their brains can say, oh, that didn't work. It's really annoying, but I know I can try something different. That's really, really important. And again, you can model that, can't you? You can scaffold that. Oh, you're trying to stick that together, it didn't work. Why don't we try it with some tape? You know, whatever you're trying to do, you can model your scaffold, you can support solutions for children. But also, it doesn't hurt to let them come to these conclusions by themselves. It helps them to develop resilience. Resilience really helps later on with strong mental health. So again, it's a really, really important thing for us to support. Encouraging collaborative play. Now I've put here role play, large scale art, or projects that require teamwork. It doesn't even have to be anything as formal as that. Let's imagine you're all out in the woods and there's a massive log on the floor, and the children decide they want that log to be moved from one side of a clearing to another. And they all get together and they pull that log or they roll that log together. That's collaborative play. Again, it sort of fits in with the other two, doesn't it? Because you're thinking about negotiation, trying things, having a challenge, working together. All of these things really support that brain development that children need to be able to have this executive self-regulation. Sorry. So number 4 is physical activity. Robust physical activity boosts cognitive development for the very, very simple reason that when a child is very physically active, blood flow increases to the brain, and increased blood flow supports brain development. It's as simple as that. So let's take that example again, that you're out in the woods and they're climbing, they're pulling a great big log across, something like that. All of that is, as well as encouraging collaborative play and as well as being a challenge, it's also feeding their brain with more blood, greater blood supply. Then the number 5 is talking about learning, thinking and reflecting. This doesn't necessarily mean, and I realise from the way it's written, it could come across as you're saying, do you remember when you hit so-and-so or when you snatched something? It's not really that. It's just talking about their day, talking about what you did, what worked, what didn't work, what might you try differently next time. Not necessarily expecting very young children to reflect on what in the past we might have called unwanted behavior, because they're just not capable of doing that. And it wouldn't make sense to them. So in what we mean here is, oh, when you were trying really hard to climb that tree, weren't you? Or you did such a great job pulling that log with all your friends, and next time maybe we could roll it next time, or we could climb on top of it next time, or whatever. But reflecting on something that's happened that day, again, these are approaches that we're probably all doing all of the time. But if you keep in mind that the child's brain is not wired the same way as ours, you can see that all these things are just so important. They really support self-regulation. And as I say, number one, definitely co-regulation, working alongside, modeling empathy. So, oh, it's sad when so-and-so fell over. Let's help them stand up. Or I can see that you're really upset about something. I wonder what we can do to help that. Why are you so worried? Sometimes, occasionally, and definitely in the past, you would have seen practitioners picking up a child and saying, right, it's time to go and do something or other, and the child is kicking and screaming. But instead of doing that, if we can model empathy, and say, oh, it's time to go now, and that, can I help you put your shoes on? Do you need some help to put your shoes on? Can you find your coat? If you can model empathy and talk to children in a calm and gentle way like that, you are offering them all these things that help with co-regulation. So it's just really, really the absolute best thing you can do. So instead of managing behavior or behavior management, I've put on here managing big emotions, because I'm not a particular fan of that phrase of behavior management, but I do understand why we might use it. So first of all, knowing what we know now about a child's brain, do we have realistic expectations of their ability to self-regulate? Are we really expecting a 2-year-old to do something that their brain just can't do? And if we look at it that way, if we look at when they have a massive meltdown, or they're upset, or they're cross, or they're angry, are we being realistic and expecting their behavior to be different? That's a really good way to start, I think. We also need to, and I know you will already all know this, consider the following factors. Are they very tired? Are they ill? Is anything going on at home? Have you considered ACEs? I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase or that acronym, but it's adverse childhood experiences. So children who have had adverse childhood experiences, their brain can take longer to reach the same point as other children. That development can be slightly delayed, and we should take that into account. So a child who's had some sort of trauma, or parents have split up, or anything like that, can sort of put a little bit of a pause on their brain development. And because of that, we might be expecting them, because of their age, to be able to do something that their brain just can't do yet. Also, thinking about behavior as a form of communication, and try and understand what's behind it. Now, I've been a childminder a long time, so like all of you, I'm completely aware of how difficult it can be as a lone worker with 3 or 4 children, and one child is particularly angry or cross, or you've got more than one child is particularly angry or cross, and you're sort of in the maelstrom of it all. But if we can try and step back and think, what's actually going on here? Are they tired? Are they ill? I have a child that has I hope you don't mind me saying, constipation, and I know when that child is cross, it's because they need to go to the toilet. And if you factor those things in, so I can take that child to one side and say, I think you might have a bit of a tummy ache. Why don't we sit and read a story for a minute? And then, it just helps them to sort of co-regulate, really. So when children get very upset, they've lost the ability to regulate their emotions and their behavior. And sometimes you just need to, I would say, step back from trying to make them do something particular. You know, in the past we would have had, I don't know, time out or sitting on a certain place, or thinking about what you've done. Go and sit there and think about what you've done. So let's have a look at the next slide, and you'll see these are things that work and don't work, and they've been proven to work and not work. So big feelings are overwhelming. A child has their brain is just overwhelmed, and they haven't got the ability to regulate their emotions and their behavior. What works? Empathy, love, calm, being calm with them. Cuddles, maybe. Most children like a cuddle. Some children don't like a cuddle. Some children, when they get to a dysregulated place, they want someone just to be nearby but don't want a cuddle. So that depends on the individual child. As we've said before, take a holistic approach. Look for the triggers that are setting that child off or stopping them from being able to regulate. They're tired, they're hungry, something particular has happened. It could just be at the end of the day and it's all just a bit too much. And key, of course, as with all things, is communication with the parents. So you know what's going on at home, whether they've slept well, whether they haven't eaten, whether they haven't done a poo for a couple of days. You know, all these things are really important for you to know, so that when children do have these sort of big feelings that are overwhelming them, it's not just random. They're not just doing it. They don't really want it to happen either, and it feels really scary for them. So we need to try and find out what's going on behind that behavior. Now, what doesn't work, and this has been proven as well, it's not just me saying it, timeout doesn't work. It's a very old-fashioned way of behaving now, of managing behavior. I have to say, I totally understand. Again, if you're a lone worker and you've got 3 or 4 children and one child is being violent to the other children, you might need to physically separate children. You might need to put something in one room for the other children to play with while you go into another room with the child that's really upset, or you might just need to go to other sides of the room or the cabin, or however you do it, because we've all got different settings. But what doesn't work is taking a child who is already dysregulated, who is already scared, who is already overwhelmed with emotions that they can't handle and don't know what to do with, and putting them somewhere and saying, you sit there for, I don't know, Super Nanny used to say 1 minute per year, didn't she? You sit there for 4 minutes, and when you finish at 4 minutes, I'm going to come back and you will be behaving. And that's just when we know that a child's brain isn't wired in the same way as ours is, we know that that's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. In fact, it's probably going to make the situation worse. Also, what doesn't work is removing treats or toys, or any type of punishment. Obviously, not corporal punishment, but anything where you're taking something away as punishment for something that the child can't help. They cannot help being overwhelmed by these emotions. So punishing them makes no sense, especially threats of later punishment. So I've put here, for example, no TV this evening, or I don't know, you can't get any sweets at the shop tomorrow, or something like that. You might as well be saying, I'm not going to buy you sweets next year, for all the use it will make. The children we're talking about in early years, they are just not capable of holding that information or making that connection between the way they behaved and something that happens the next day. It's just not possible for their brains to do it. So really, we're just sort of wasting our time doing that with them, aren't we? It has been shown that these things don't work. And again, I've put removing treats and toys. I know that sometimes when you've got a lot of children and they're all becoming overwhelmed, you might, and it's because of one particular object, you might want to just calm the situation down by putting that object out of sight just for a moment, and then we'll just play with something else for now. That's different to saying, you can't have that because of your negative behavior. Because again, we've just seen that the child can't help that behavior. That's something that's happening to them. It's not something that they've made a decision to do. We as adults can decide to behave in a certain way because we have executive function. Our frontal lobes hopefully are fully formed, and we can decide whether we behave in a nice, empathetic way or in a nasty, cruel way. But children just can't. That behavior is just beyond them. Their brain can't do it. So let's have a look. Now, as in all things, there are times when everything you've done is what the evidence shows you should do, and the child still is struggling. So I would always say, don't feel that you have to struggle with them indefinitely. It's no bad thing to know when to look for additional support, whether you speak to the health visitor or get the child to the GP, anything like that, because there could be something going on that you're just not aware of, and you have to seek additional support. And that's the sign of a good practitioner. I would say that you know when this has got to a point where it's not helpful for the child and it's not helpful for you or for the other children in your setting. And that's when you speak to the parents and say, I think we might need to go and speak to someone about so and so and see why he's getting so worried or so upset or so anxious or whatever the thing is with the child. I'm really aware that I'm sort of waffling on a lot there, and I think I've come to the end of my, yes, I have. I've come to the end of my slide. So because it's being recorded, when you get to the very end, I'll go to the end. Here are your reading and references. Here are all the links to things. Down at the bottom, I've just randomly chosen one of the free courses that are available about neuroscience in early years. And I did one of these about 3 or 4 years ago now. They're just level 2s, but they're surprisingly in depth, and it will change the way you look at children's behaviour forever. Because instead of seeing the behaviour as something, as I said, that the child has chosen to do, he's chosen to hear his friend, he's chosen to snatch that toy, you see it as a result of their brain development. And it really changes the way you approach children. So again, this was just one of many that come up when you Google free neuroscience courses. There are so many of them. So I would definitely recommend, if you're interested, try and take this a little bit further. It's a fairly straightforward thing to do, a level 2 course. It's good for your CPD, obviously, but it's also it's just a very interesting thing to do. And I think most of you, if you're interested enough to come on to something like this, will also be interested enough to find out more and take it a bit further. As always, it benefits the children in your setting, doesn't it? So I don't think I can go backwards, but I can come off there. And Debs, it's already being recorded. It usually takes a little while for them to put it up on YouTube, because I think that's Damon's job, and